Good evening, everyone. So today our group will be presenting the short story "Or Else the Lightning God," and our group members consist of me, Pang Jasin, Yap Ji Chong, Bhupinder Singh, Yo Jun Nan, and Surendran Manimaran. So let's start with the first element, which is the tone of the short story. The first one is one of the tone in the short story is ominous. The definition is given by threatening and suggestive that something bad will happen or will be revealed. For example, when Margaret and her mother-in-law quarreled, her mother-in-law said that they would be struck by the lightning god. The lightning god in heaven hits the cries of the old. And another example would be those who are cruel to their elders will never prosper. They are cursed. I curse you now. You are bearing a child, but I curse you. That suggests that the mother-in-law is cursing the Margaret, and this is being ominous. Next, another tone would be regretful, which the definition is given by sorrowful and apologetic and wishful. For example, quoted from the short story, "Mother, please," sobbed Margaret and could not go on. Her mother and Lillian wept with her, and the sons pleaded with the old one to grant them the favor. This shows that Margaret is very regretful about her actions and plead her mother-in-law to write on the prayers paper so that it could save their child. Another example would be when told of the temple medium's advice, Margaret, drawn, haggard, and hollow-eyed, asked in a small pleading voice, "Do you think it will work? Do you think it will save my baby?" That means that shows that Margaret is regret of her actions and wanted to and repent of her mistakes and wanted to mend the situation. The next will be the theme of the short story. The first theme will be sometimes misunderstanding can lead to tragic incidents. For example, when Margaret heard rumors from her colleagues that her mother-in-law complained to the washerwoman that Margaret ill-treated her by not giving her proper food and enough money, Margaret straight away confronted her mother-in-law and kicked her out of the house before investigating or asking her to clarify the situation. The next one, this brought to the incident where Margaret is so furious that she chased her mother-in-law out of the house, and the mother-in-law did not forgive her until the end of the story. The next theme will be mutual respect should exist in a family. For example, Margaret's mother-in-law only asked for respect from Margaret without showing respect to Margaret. For example, "So I leave now, but before I go, let me tell you this, those who are cruel to their elders will never prosper." This shows that the mother-in-law does not show any respect to Margaret, but only asking respect from her, and this should not be practiced in a family. This caused the misunderstanding and the tragic incident which happens next in the story, which caused Margaret to be emotionally unstable and the mother-in-law to be extremely disappointed and furious. The next element would be the purpose of the short story. The first one, the purpose of the whole short story is to tell us that to always respect elders. This is portrayed in the whole short story where Margaret is being disrespectful to her mother-in-law. And the next one is to learn how to handle problems in a calm, composed manner, unlike Margaret, who is not being very rational. Straight after Margaret heard the rumor about the mother-in-law's complaint, she straight away confronted her mother-in-law and kicked her out of her house without asking or investigating. The next purpose is to learn to be more appreciative. Like, for example, Margaret gave her mother-in-law a lot of stuff in monetary and necessities by letting her to live in the house and give her proper food. Next, I will pass the presentation to my member, Paul. He will explain further about the presentation.
And the next element that I would like to present is the plot. Now in the plot we have 4 subtopics. As you can see, the conflicts, the climax, the falling action and the ending. Now for the conflicts, we have internal and external conflicts. Now as you can see, for the internal conflicts, Margaret is having problems with her own self. For example, after the curse, she was constantly having nightmares and she lost her appetite to eat and so on. She was having an obsession to a point where she was constantly moody, depressed, obsessed, and that would obviously affect her baby. And for the external conflicts, Margaret wasn't in very good terms with her mother-in-law. She would try her best to be a good daughter-in-law, and she would provide money, food, clean the house, everything. However, the mother-in-law would still end up gossiping about her to the old folks. And also the mother-in-law would show biasness towards her other daughter-in-laws compared to her own daughter-in-law. And next we move on to the climax. Now in the beginning, the start of the climax, Margaret was having lunch with her colleagues until she heard one of her colleagues mention that they heard a rumor that Margaret's mother-in-law was gossiping about her. That Margaret's mother-in-law proclaimed that she did not receive proper food at home and Margaret was mistreating her at home. After hearing that, Margaret lost her patience and she completely blew her composure. She stormed home and she completely confronted her mother-in-law. She accused her mother-in-law of ingratitude, deceit, and of injustice. Eventually, the mother-in-law woke up and argued back with Margaret, and the entire argument ended up with Margaret chasing her mother-in-law out of the house. Margaret's mother-in-law responded by cursing Margaret and leaving in the stormy rain. The falling action. In the falling action, Margaret was experiencing all sorts of bad experience. She wasn't able to sleep, she wasn't able to eat, she couldn't go to work in peace, and she was always disturbed mentally. And this was also giving a lot of bad effects to her baby. Furthermore, her husband was also very worried for his wife and his child. He ended up taking both of them for a doctor's appointment, but however, the doctor recommended psychiatric treatment. Meanwhile, Margaret's mother consulted a temple medium. In a trance, he said that the only thing that could save Margaret's life is if Margaret's mother-in-law were to write words on a prayer paper, and that prayer paper was to be burnt, and those ashes put in water, and Margaret has to drink those water. That is the only thing that could save Margaret's life. In the end, Margaret was very distressed and was often obsessed. She was pleading for forgiveness, but the old lady would not forgive Margaret due to her ego. After pleading and begging from Margaret, finally the mother-in-law decided that she would forgive Margaret so that they could leave her in peace. So she ended up writing some words on the praying paper, and the paper was burnt, and so Margaret drank everything to the last drop. The next thing that I will present is the language use. And 4 parts of this language use includes personification, irony, allusion, and simile. As you can see, one of our examples for personification is the roar of the rain outside almost drowned her words, but Margaret heard and a thrill of terror ran through her. This was during the story after Margaret's fight with her mother-in-law. We also have an element of irony inside. At the start of the story, Margaret's mother constantly advised her not to disrespect elders, or she will face the wrath of the lightning god. Karma will hit her back. However, she never listened and she always argued back with her mother. Eventually, in the end, Margaret was undergoing depression and obsession and pleaded for forgiveness from her mother-in-law. She realized that the curse is real and she pleaded the old one to grant them a favor. The next is a simile. For example, so everyone comes to Kiat stretching out a long arm, and here I am slaving like a fool in the office to support a host of parasites. Margaret was very upset because her husband's brothers and their respective wives would earn a fortune, but they would not put in any efforts to take care of the mother-in-law. All efforts were put on Margaret and her husband alone. The next one that I will present is allusion. For example, Margaret's mother once told Margaret that she was nagged and scolded by her own mother-in-law. She was trying to compare and contrast her own situation when she was younger with her daughter's situation at the moment. She also said that if she and her husband would want to go out, she would constantly need permission from her mother-in-law, despite the fact that they are married. Although her mother-in-law was cruel to Margaret's mother, she still respected her mother-in-law no matter what, so that she won't get cursed of the lightning god. That is the message that Margaret's mother tried to portray to Margaret. And furthermore, I will introduce Yap Tzu Song to present the setting.
So, I'll be presenting the setting. Next. First of all, we'll talk about the location. The bedroom first. The bedroom is where Margaret usually calls Chuan Chu at the beginning of the story, and after the climax, it means that after the fight with her mother-in-law, Margaret spent her time crying and having nightmares in her bedroom. Next up is the kitchen. The kitchen is where most of the conflicts and the climax. The conflicts that Margaret's mother-in-law once grew Chinese herbal medicine, and it ruined Margaret's cooker, which also means that this in turn become a conflict between her mother-in-law and Margaret. The climax happened at the kitchen is when Margaret confronted her mother-in-law as she heard words of her mother-in-law gossiping about her. Next up is mother-in-law room. Is when Margaret's mother-in-law invited a temple medium king to come to contact with Ng Kiet's late father. This in turn irritated Margaret. Next up is hospital. This is the place where Margaret is consulted by Dr. Lee about her child. And the fifth one is Ng Long house, is where Margaret, Ng Kiet and her in-laws beg for her mother-in-law forgiveness. Next up is time. There are three times. Morning is where Margaret's mother came to visit Margaret and give advice to warn her not to disrespect her mother-in-law, or else the lightning god will punish her. Second up is evening. Is where Margaret called her friend Chuan Chu and complained about her mother-in-law and about things that are troubling her. And the third one is night. Is where after the climax, after the fight, after the quarrel between her and her mother-in-law, is where Margaret spent her time crying and having nightmares. Next up is weather condition. The weather condition in the stories only have one specific only. It's rainy. It's when Margaret comes home and go to the kitchen and quarrel with her mother-in-law, which become the climax of the story. Next up, the social condition. The social condition, which in turn that is Margaret live in the protagonist live in a Chinese community. Why? Margaret's mother-in-law cannot speak English. Her friend's husband and in-laws have Chinese names. The third one is that her mother-in-law brew Chinese herbal medicine. And the fourth one is mother-in-law invited a temple medium to contact her late husband. These four examples means that it proves that Margaret lived in a Chinese community. The fifth, the moods and the atmosphere. There are three moods. The relax is when the beginning of the story is when Margaret call her friends to complain about her mother-in-law. The second one would be cheerful, is when Margaret went to shopping and bought a giant toy, a big toy for her future child. And the third one is tense, as Margaret come home to protest and quarrel against her mother-in-law. Okay, I'll pass the floor to my friend, Yue Chun En.
So hello, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the characters in the whole story. So we got total of 12 characters in the story. What is character? Character is an individual in the literary work, and I'm gonna read out all the characters. The first one is Margaret, and Margaret's mother-in-law, and Xuan Chu, who is the Margaret's best friend, and then Ng Kiat, who is the husband of Margaret, and then Ang Long, and Milian, Ng Qian, and Ah Chan, and also Margaret's mother, Margaret's neighbor, the washerwoman, and the Margaret's colleague, and the temple meter. So there are two major characters in the whole story, which are Margaret and Margaret's mother-in-law. The whole story revolves around these two characters, and these two characters is very, very important to the whole story, and they play a major and important role to the whole story, and their role is crucial. Next one. And except for the two characters that I said just now, the other 10 characters all are the minor character of the story. Okay, and these characters are less important to the two characters that I said just now, that I mentioned just now. Although they are less important and they play less role, but they are still be able to set up for the setting of the story, and they also can set up the background for the story. The example of the flat characters is Margaret's mother. Margaret's mother had advised Margaret that she should respect and listen to her mother-in-law, even though her mother-in-law has caused some troublesome to her. Margaret's mother also told her the story of her when she was young. When she was younger, her mother-in-law will scold her every day and was cruel and strict to her. When her mother and her father want to go out to movies back then, they have to ask permission from her mother-in-law, and they are very strict, and they feel very stressful living with them. Even though Margaret's mother still be able, and she still decided to respect her mother-in-law so that she won't get the curse from the lightning god. The fear of the curse of the lightning god has caused Margaret's mother to obey her mother-in-law. Next one. And other than that, the second flat character is Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee is a doctor of Margaret. Dr. Lee is a very responsible doctor, and he kept on reminding Margaret that she should take care of her body. For example, Dr. Lee had advised Margaret that she shouldn't smoke because she is having the baby. And she was also the one who followed up with the condition of Margaret and her baby during the whole pregnancy. Dr. Lee also had advised Ng Kiat, who is the husband of Margaret, to take Margaret to follow up with her mental illness, because Margaret potentially might have mental illness, and Dr. Lee recommended Ng Kiat to take her to the psychiatric treatment for her anxiety and depression problems. Alright, so furthermore, I'll talk about the protagonist of this story. The protagonist of the story is different from other story because usually the protagonist of a story is a hero or possess good and attractive attributes and characteristics. But for this story, Margaret, who is the protagonist of the story, she is very unique because she was a character that is like her mother-in-law, because she always thinks that her mother-in-law caused a lot of troublesome to her and her husband. But then again, her mother-in-law also never been grateful to them. So after the quarreling that they are having and the ungratefulness of her mother-in-law, Margaret had decided to chase her mother-in-law out of the house. When she decided to chase her mother-in-law out of the house, her mother-in-law cursed her to have constant fear and anxiety, and which caused her to have some kind of mental illness. And then at last, Margaret decided to say sorry to her mother, and then beg her mother and plead her mother-in-law to write the prayer paper for her so that she can get rid of the curse. So next one is the antagonist of the whole story, which is Margaret's mother-in-law. She was the rival of the main character, who was Margaret. She was old and full of grey hair. She was hated by Margaret and being called as Dowager. Margaret disliked everything that she did and practiced. For example, her mother-in-law once invited a medium to the house so that she can communicate with her dead father-in-law. And this makes Margaret to be very angry. This caused Margaret to be very angry. And then in the end of the story, her mother-in-law still decided to write the prayer paper for Margaret, even though she was still angry and unwilling to. And that's all for the character part of the story. And then there's still one of our member who is Surendran. He is not here today because he's unavailable. So I'm gonna summarize his part. He's gonna present about the point of view and the author bias of the story. And that's all for today. Thank you.